country music legend who has won a dozen Grammys, and tomorrow he will be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The one, the only, Willie Nelson.
Willie Nelson's guitar, Trigger, is almost as famous as he is. But the story behind the deep hole worn into its wood is a secret he's kept for decades. It's not just from playing, it's a scar that represents a lifetime of being abandoned, rejected, and betrayed.
For some reason I had to go and I couldn't do it, but I've always regretted the fact that I didn't get to go.
We're going to peel back the layers of the myth and reveal the moment his own family walked away, leaving him a forgotten child in the Texas dust. And believe it or not, that first wound connects directly to the silent, heartbreaking battle he's facing right now, alone at the age of 92. Before the braids, there was brokenness. Some hearts, you see, are born with cracks too wide for a childhood to fill. Before he was a legend, before the world ever heard the gravel in his voice or the aching beauty of On the Road Again, Willie Nelson was just a forgotten child in the dust of Abbott, Texas. Born in 1933, he was left behind long before he ever had a chance to belong. The fact is that his mother walked out first, vanishing from his life like smoke with no note, no farewell. His father, barely holding himself together, remarried and disappeared too. Willie was just a baby, too young to understand betrayal, but old enough to feel its cold burn. He and his sister Bobby were left in the care of their poor but kind-hearted grandparents who did what they could to patch the holes in two children nobody else stayed to love. It wasn't neglect, it was survival. But that survival came at a brutal cost. His grandfather, a blacksmith and the first person to ever place a guitar in Willie's hands, became the boy's only anchor, his quiet strength, his hero. And then, when Willie was just 6 years old, pneumonia stole him away too. That passing wasn't just devastating, it shattered what little security Willie had left. In his own book, he wrote with aching clarity, "Our separation from Mother and Daddy seemed worse than a death because they were still out there in the world. But they weren't with me and Bobby like they were supposed to be." How cruel. How impossibly painful for a child to know that his parents were alive but just not interested. The pain wasn't just grief, it was raw and relentless abandonment. By the time he turned 7, he wasn't playing with toys, he was clinging to a guitar as if it were a lifeline. Get this. At age 9, while other boys were playing in the dirt, he was performing in local bars with the Bohemian Polka Band, trying to turn pain into sound. He sang gospel in church, but even there, he was a little boy singing not for salvation, but for someone, anyone, to hear him. The music that later soothed millions was born from nights he lay awake asking himself why love always left. He never forgot those days, not the way the Texas sun beat down on him as he picked cotton for pennies, his fingers bleeding. By the time he was a teenager, he had already seen more loss than most adults see in a lifetime. But the real gut punch was just around the corner waiting for him in Nashville. Slamming the door on a dream. The sun in Texas doesn't just shine, it punishes. And for a teenage Willie Nelson, that blazing heat became a daily ritual. By the time he was 14, he'd already cycled through more jobs than most adults twice his age. Tree trimmer, phone operator, nightclub bouncer, encyclopedia salesman. He scrubbed dishes, patched saddles, and hawked $600 book sets door to door to families who couldn't even afford a decent meal. He played in bars at night and slept wherever he could, sometimes on floors, sometimes in his car, sometimes not at all. And Nashville, the place every country musician dreams of, slammed its doors in his face again and again. Then came a moment so dark that Willie almost didn't make it through. In his 20s, living in a broken-down trailer near Nashville, overwhelmed by rejection and failure, Willie walked out into the night and lay down in the middle of a usually busy street. He just wanted the noise to stop. But nobody even noticed. The cars just swerved around him. In that moment of utter invisibility, he didn't see his life flash before his eyes. There was just silence. He later wrote, "All I know is I got up, walked back to the bar, and had another drink." That's the kind of story that births legends, because sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is simply stand back up. You see, nobody wants to say this, but the fact is that Nashville was erasing him while using his genius to build other stars. In 1959, desperate to buy groceries for his growing family, he sold the rights to his gospel ballad Family Bible for just $100. The song became a massive hit, but Willie's name wasn't even on the label. That heartbreak became a pattern. Crazy, a haunting melody of pain and longing, became an eternal classic for Patsy Cline. Funny How Time Slips Away was a hit for Billy Walker. Pretty Paper found life through Roy Orbison. While his lyrics echoed through every jukebox in America, the man behind the music was told his own voice was too rough, too real. They didn't hear the soul, they wanted polish, and for that, he was told he didn't belong. With his ranch burned down and his label dropping him, Willie was left with nothing but ashes. Building a stage from the ashes. In the early 70s, Nashville had made its decision. Willie Nelson was finished. So when his ranch in Ridgetop burned to the ground, a fire that felt more like a final judgment than an accident, he packed up what little pride he had left and drove back to Texas. At 39 years old, broke and bruised, he could have vanished. But instead, in the quiet chaos of Austin, something was waiting. You see, Austin wasn't like Nashville. In its smoky bars, long-haired hippies sat beside rodeo cowboys. They didn't care if you looked like a rebel, they just cared if you sounded like one. And when Willie walked in, scarred by rejection, they saw what Nashville never did. An outlaw. In 1973, he released Shotgun Willie, a ragged, unapologetic album that didn't beg for approval. It was raw, and for the first time, people listened. Then, in 1975, he released Red-Headed Stranger, a bare-bones concept album so quiet and haunting, the record label called it a demo. They said it was unmarketable, but fans called it a revelation. That same year, he joined forces with Waylon Jennings, Jesse Coulter, and Tom Paul Glazer to create Wanted, The Outlaws. Here's a mind-blowing fact. It became the very first country album in history to ever go platinum, selling over 1 million copies. Suddenly, the man they once dismissed became the face of a movement. This wasn't just about music, it was about defiance. Willie wore braids, played his battered guitar his way, and dared to sound like himself. And in doing so, he gave permission to every other misfit and dreamer who'd been told they didn't fit. The outlaw hadn't just found a spotlight, he'd built his own damn stage. And for the first time in his life, the world finally listened. But just as the world was singing his songs, another storm was building behind the scenes. This time, the betrayal wasn't from a record label, it was from inside his own home. When your heroes become ghosts. Fame couldn't shelter Willie from the deepest cuts. The thing is, the worst pain came not from failure, but from the faces he could never see again. It was Christmas Day, 1991, when time stopped. Willie received a phone call that shattered something inside him forever. His firstborn son, Billy, had passed away under heartbreaking circumstances. Billy had been working on a gospel album, but behind closed doors, a quiet storm had been raging. Willie would later say in the simplest, most devastating words, "I've never experienced anything so devastating in my life." There are no songs for a pain like that. For years, every Christmas was haunted by that silence, and the losses kept coming. In February 2020, Paul English, his drummer, bodyguard, and brother in spirit for over 60 years, passed away. 2 years later, his sister Bobby Nelson was gone. She was his first bandmate, the keeper of his childhood memories, his lifelong musical shadow. When she passed, a bridge to his past collapsed. Then, as if fate wasn't finished, came the final blow. In September 2024, Chris Christopherson, his brother-in-arms and fellow highwayman, passed away. With Johnny Cash and Waylon Jennings already gone, Willie suddenly stood alone, the final highwayman. And let's not forget the ultimate betrayal. Years earlier, while married to his second wife, Shirley Colley, she opened a hospital bill by mistake. The charge was for the delivery of a baby girl born to a Mrs. Connie Nelson. The secret was out. He had another family. That moment shattered his marriage and left a scar of guilt that lingered for decades. Now, at 92, when Willie takes the stage, he walks through a graveyard of memories. He's a father without his son, a brother without his sister, a band leader without his beat, and a poet without his closest confidants. So how does a man carry all that weight and still find a reason to sing? Richer than a king, broken like a man. So now you have to wonder, is any of this real? Could one man really endure so much and still be standing? The thing is, it's not just the emotional scars, there's a quiet war raging inside Willie Nelson's body. Diagnosed with emphysema after decades of smoking, every breath is a victory. He underwent a stem cell operation just to keep his lungs working. He had to give up smoking everything, a quiet surrender for a man known for his rebellion. And yet, he's not fading away. Far from it. As of 2025, the man who once lost everything to the IRS, a staggering $16.7 million, now has a net worth estimated at over $25 million. He lives on a sprawling 700-acre ranch in Texas, surrounded by family and nearly 70 horses he rescued from being sent to the slaughterhouse. In April 2025, he released his 76th solo album, The Last Leaf on the Tree, a soulful reflection on aging and loss that critics are calling a masterpiece. Just months earlier, he stunned the world by appearing on stage with Beyoncé, a quiet, steady legend strumming Trigger beside a global pop icon. It's almost hard to believe. You start to ask yourself, how is this possible? Are we missing a key detail? Is this all just a story? The truth is, he keeps going because the music is now a conversation with ghosts. But there's another wilder theory whispered in the darkest corners of old Texas bars. A theory that some say is the only thing that makes sense. Think about it. That night in Nashville, when he lay down on the pavement completely broken, waiting for the end, what if something else found him first? The legend goes that in that moment of ultimate surrender, a bargain was struck. He would get everything he ever wanted, a voice that defined a generation, a life longer than all his peers, and a legend that would never die. But the price would be unimaginable. For every ounce of fame, he would pay with a piece of his heart. The deal would take his son, his closest friends, his sister, his peace, leaving him the last man standing, a king ruling an empire of memories. It would burn his house down only to give him a bigger one. It would take his money only to give him more. It was a cruel, cosmic trade, his soul for a song. The truth is, he keeps going because the music is now a conversation with ghosts. Every song is for Billy, for Bobby, for Paul, for Chris. When you see him on stage at 92, frail but smiling, you're not just watching a concert. You're witnessing a man turn a lifetime of grief into a final, beautiful melody. He's not just surviving, he's transforming suffering into a legacy. He carries the weight of everyone he's lost in every single chord he plays. He has turned more pain into beauty than anyone alive. But was all that suffering necessary to create the legend? Like and subscribe for more stories that matter.